sometimes you have to go back to the source. If you look at the report completed by the Intelligence Committee, a 300-page report, 17 witnesses, over 100 hours of testimony, they make findings of fact. Now, there's fact and there's make-believe. The findings of fact, and I'm going to read right from the report. In further, the president solicited the interference of a foreign government in Ukraine in the 2020 U.S. presidential election. In furtherance of this scheme, President Trump, directly and acting through his agents within and outside the U.S. government, sought to pressure and induce Ukraine's newly elected president, Zelensky, to publicly announce unfounded allegations that would benefit President Trump's personal political interests and re-election effort. As part of the scheme, President Trump, this again, findings of fact, personally and directly requested for the president of Ukraine that the government of Ukraine publicly announce the investigation into the president, vice president, and his son. President Trump ordered the suspension of $391 million in vital military assistance urgently needed by Ukraine to resist Russian aggression. And here's the important part. In directing and orchestrating this scheme to advance his personal political interests, President Trump did not implement, promote, or advance U.S. anti-corruption policies. In fact, the president sought to pressure and induce the government of Ukraine to announce politically motivated investigations, lacking legitimate prediction that the United States government otherwise discourages and opposes as a matter of policy in that country and around the world. In so doing, the president undermined U.S. policy supporting anti-corruption reform and the rule of law in Ukraine and undermined U.S. national security. So the findings of fact that are detailed in the report completely refute that claim. And again, I return to the most important fact. The President of the United States abused the power of his office, the enormous power of the presidency, not to advance the public good, but to advance the political interests of Donald Trump. He used taxpayer funds, nearly $400 million, to leverage that, and in doing so, undermined the national security of the United States. He must be held accountable because no one in this country, no one, including the President of the United States, is above the law. And the one body that is charged with making certain that we vindicate the power of the people to hold the President accountable is the Congress of the United States. If you're not up to the job, you don't belong in Congress.
Gentleman yields back. The question now occurs on the Gates Amendment. Those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the nays have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Roll call is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
No.
Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson-Lee? Ms. Jackson-Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson of Georgia? Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no. Mr. Deutsch? Mr. Deutsch votes no. Ms. Bass? Ms. Bass votes no. Mr. Richmond?
No.
Mr. Richmond votes no. Mr. Jeffries? No. Mr. Jeffries votes no. Mr. Cicilline?
No.
Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell?
No.
Mr. Swalwell votes no. Mr. Liu? Mr. Raskin? Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes no. Ms. Demings? Ms. Demings votes no. Mr. Correa?
No.
Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon?
No.
Ms. Scanlon votes no. Ms. Garcia?
No.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse votes no. Ms. McBath? Ms. McBath votes no. Mr. Stanton?
No.
Mr. Stanton votes no. Ms. Dean?
No.
Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. McCarcel-Powell? Ms. McCarcel-Powell votes no. Ms. Escobar?
No.
Ms. Escobar votes no. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins votes aye. Mr. Sensenbrenner? Mr. Sensenbrenner votes aye. Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. Gomer? Mr. Gomer votes aye. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck votes aye. Mr. Ratcliffe? Mr. Ratcliffe votes yes. Ms. Roby?
Aye.
Ms. Roby votes aye. Mr. Gates?
Aye.
Mr. Gates votes aye. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes aye. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock?
Aye.
Mr. McClintock votes aye. Ms. Lesko?
Aye.
Ms. Lesko votes aye. Mr. Reschenthaler? Mr. Reschenthaler votes aye. Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes aye. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes yes. Mr. Stubbe? Mr. Stubbe votes yes.
Vote. The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 17 ayes and 23 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Mr. Chairman,
Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does Mr. Biggs seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The gentleman has amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.Res. 755,
reserve
offered
a
by
point of
Mr.
order.
Biggs of Arizona.
Gentlelady reserves a point of order. The gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Is she going to read the amendment, sir?
The clerk will read the amendment.
Page 4, strike line 8 and all that follows through line 13 and insert the following. 3. The aid was released within days of Ukrainian President Zelensky signing 2 major anti-corruption measures into law, convincing President Trump that the new Ukrainian administration was serious about reform measures and consistent with administration policy to ensure foreign aid is not used for corrupt purposes.
The gentleman will explain his amendment.
I withdraw my point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I draw my colleagues' attention to a letter sent yesterday from the Office of Management and Budget regarding the temporary pause on aid to Ukraine. The letter is addressed to Mr. Tom Armstrong, General Counsel of the GAO, and I ask unanimous consent that it be included in the record.
Object.
The entire reason we're here today is because Democrats have accused the president of conditioning aid to Ukraine on investigations into his political opponent. Today, Democrats have continued to claim President Trump withheld or froze foreign aid to Ukraine, but the OMB letter walks through the entire process behind this temporary delay. First, the money was paused, but DOD was permitted to engage in all of the activities short of obligation necessary to ensure that DOD would not be precluded from obligating the funds prior to the expiration. The money was paused pending a policy decision. And what was the policy decision? Your 2 witnesses, Fiona Hill and David Hale, testified that there was an ongoing global review of foreign assistance generally to ensure any program receiving funds were actually worthy beneficiaries of our assistance, that the programs made sense, etc. Mr. Hale further testified that the president's skeptical views on foreign assistance guided the Foreign Affairs Review. In fact, the only direct evidence for the reasons for the pause comes from OMB official Mark Sandy, who testified that he learned in September that the pause was related to, quote, the president's concern about other countries contributing more to Ukraine, close quote. He explained how OMB received requests for information on what other countries were contributing to Ukraine, which OMB provided in the first week of September. The aid was released, of course, on September 11th. So, Democrats want to impeach the president for trying to ensure that taxpayer funds are spent efficiently and responsibly. Democrats have accused his president of a myriad of things, including violation of the Impoundment Control Act, which prohibits the executive from essentially pocket vetoing funds appropriated by Congress. This letter that I'm trying to introduce shows instead that the administration never intended or actually violated the law. In fact, it shows that they always intended to disperse the funds. That is why DOD was permitted to engage in all activities in preparation for the delivery of the aid. Major case again. The OMB letter walks through at great length the history behind programmatic delays. I'm sure this will be boring to my friends on the other side, since it technocratically destroys their central theory for impeachment. In the letter, the OMB General Counsel said even with the temporary withholding, the Department of Defense was able to obligate about 84% of the $250 million before the end of the fiscal year on September 30th. In the last year, the Obama administration, it was only 79%. More recently, in 2018, it was 83%, and in 2017, 91%. Let's get back to it. The specific language of the Appropriations Authority says, for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, it's hereby, $250 million is hereby appropriated to remain available until September 30th, 2019. That's point 1, to remain available until September 30th, 2019. When we authorized funds, we gave the administration a deadline. The administration complied with that deadline. The administration acted completely and totally within the bounds of the law. Secondly, the OMB's letter now definitively destroys